And it is really my great honor to welcome two very distinguished guests tonight, Elaine Sciolino and Gérard Araud. Each of you have spent so much time as an expat in France and in the US respectively, that actually I'm not sure whether I should introduce either of you as French or American. And it's really not an easy task to introduce such important figures. So tonight, in the spirit of transcending our identities, more than the cultural counselor in New York, it is really the Parisian in me who is delighted to introduce our evening. I lived in Paris for 10 years before moving to New York City 2 months ago, and I must say that the thing I miss the most is really the river. And I'm afraid that the great Hudson and East rivers, even though they run through this remarkable city, will never replace my beloved Seine. It seems sometimes like everything that could be said about Paris has been said already. But no one has brought attention and paid tribute to his very heart, like Elaine Sciolino managed to do in her latest book. The Seine has been a muse for generations of writers, including Apollinaire, the French poet, whose vibrant poem I learned when I was 10. I murmured to the river every time I crossed over its depths. Sous le pont Mirabeau coule la Seine et nos amours. Faut-il qu'ils m'en souviennent, la joie venait toujours après la peine. Vienne la nuit, sonne l'heure, les jours s'en vont, je demeure. Under the Mirabeau Bridge flows the Seine and our loves. May I remember them, joy always follows pain. But Paris isn't only a literary cliché. It's really like New York, a very diverse, nuanced place, hard to sum up in one book, unless you have the talent of Elaine Sciolino. In the Seine, the river that made Paris, she shares stories of her adventures along the most romantic river in the world, and in doing so, she invites us to travel all the way to Paris to see the river in ways we didn't suspect. Let me briefly introduce you to our two illustrious guests. First, Elaine Sciolino is the author of 5 books of non-fiction, including the New York Times bestseller The Only Street in Paris. She is a contributing writer and former Paris bureau chief for the New York Times. She has worked around the world as a foreign correspondent. In 2010, she was decorated as a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, the highest distinction of the French state. She and her husband have lived in Paris since 2002. And so she is not only a brilliant writer, she is definitely more Parisian than I am. Gérard Araud had a remarkable career in French diplomacy, which brought him from Paris to Tel Aviv and of course to New York, as the permanent representative of France to the Security Council and head of the permanent mission of France to the United Nations in New York. And last, to Washington, D.C., where he was the ambassador to the United States from 2014 to 2019, when he retired from his diplomatic career. We all know him as a steadfast and gifted advocate, not only for France, but also for the transatlantic relationship. And it's an honor to have him to speak with Elaine Sciolino tonight. I must add that he just released his first book, Passeport Diplomatique, which in its own way is every bit as enriching as Elaine's book. He will return for a discussion with Guy Sormand on November 5th to celebrate the release of his book, and we hope to see you all there. Without further ado, I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Okay, now I don't know how I'm going to do this exactly because I have to manage a microphone and you know what I might do? I might oh la la, santé, merci.
French technology.
Great. You see, if I were really French, I wouldn't need notes. But did you ever notice that someone like Gérard just doesn't, he just brings himself for an event like this. It's an absolute honor to be back at the Albertine, which is truly one of the most spectacular places in all of New York, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't you walk in here and you feel French, right? Yeah. And I have to thank Gaëtan for that wonderful introduction, and also Sandrine for organizing the event tonight. And of course, my dear friend Gérard, who, as Gaëtan said, has written a brilliant memoir of his 40 years in diplomacy. And what's wonderful about it is that it's written like Gérard talks, which is straight talking without a lot of flourishes. And so if you've only gone like up to the level of like French 300 in college, you will be able to get through it because it doesn't use the imperfect subjunctive very much. It's very clear and declarative. It's brilliant. So you must come back when he talks. Okay, so this evening I'm here to talk about a river, and not just any river, but the most romantic river in the world. You think you know this river? I am going to surprise you, I hope. Let's take a look at this river. It's not just the 8 miles of the river in Paris. It sort of curves and cuts through the city. It's 777 kilometers long, and it was really hard for me to write this book after writing a book about a street that was 1 kilometer long. It took me much too long to write this book. It starts in the depths of Burgundy, in the very boring part. How many of you have been to Burgundy? How many of you have ever been to the Plateau de Langres? Yeah, okay, right, you haven't. It's not the part of Burgundy that has the wine. And then you go to Paris, all the way to the sea, where the Seine is basically an estuary and is no longer a river, but quite wide. I just want to start by putting you in the mood by reading just one paragraph from the book, because we're going to have fun tonight. This is a night away from the normal vicissitudes and horrors of our era. So let's just think bonheur and plaisir. Okay. The Seine encourages us to dream, to linger, to flirt, to fall in love, or to at least fantasize that falling in love is possible. The light bouncing off her banks and bridges at night can carry even the least imaginative of us into flights of fancy. No other river comes close. The Ganges, the Mississippi, and the Yangtze, they are muscular workhorses. The Danube, it may be immortalized as the world's most recognizable waltz, but its history is one of warring nations. The Thames, who can name one famous couple who fell in love on its banks? Okay, now this is the source of the Seine. We're pretty far away from Paris. We're about 178 miles from Paris by car. But what do you notice about that sign right in the middle? What does it say?
City of Paris.
City of Paris. Does anyone know why it's the City of Paris? Because Napoleon III in 1864 decided he wanted to extend the power of Paris, and he was so in love with the Seine and it was so much a part of Paris that he sent Baron Haussmann, who changed the face of Paris, down to the source and said, call it Paris. So the City of Paris bought this little area around the source of the Seine, squared it off, and these days it's the City of Paris that administers this domain. It cuts the trees, it cuts the grass, it trims the trees, it picks up the garbage. It is kind of like the 21st arrondissement of Paris. This, you think you know the bridges of Paris? Maybe some of you saw the story that I wrote in the New York Times about the bridges. This is the first bridge on the Seine, but it's really a bridge in Paris. You can see just how small the Seine is there. And this is a replica of what the Gallo-Roman healing temple looked like at the source of the Seine. The source of the Seine was holy, and that basin that looks like a swimming pool there, that was a basin where people came from as far as the Mediterranean and what is now the English Channel to throw offerings into the water and be healed. So if you had a problem with your leg, you threw a replica of a leg, either made of wood or clay or stone. And has anybody here been to Dijon? Did you go for the mustard? Did any of you go to the Archaeological Museum? Oh my gosh, okay. Well then you may have seen the 1,500 ex-votos or offerings that were excavated from this site. And this is Sequana, the goddess of the Seine. She reigned over the temple. The name Seine comes from the word Sequana. And so people prayed to her. And this statue is in the museum in Dijon. And I thought that she was so extraordinary, I fell in love with the statue, that I thought that maybe the either the city of Paris or Rouen or Le Havre should build a replica of her, the same size as the replica of the Statue of Liberty that's in the island in the Seine. Have any of you ever seen that? You know, it's a quarter-size replica, and it was given by Americans to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. So what I did is I put in a formal application with a French plan, you know, the formal plan, and it was pretty good too. You would approve as a
sure.
grande école kind of person, yeah. And I applied to have my statue built because there was this contest, Reinvent the Seine, and because this is what I thought. A pre-Christian healing goddess with no ties to any living religion, Sequana would fit nicely into the official French policy that reveres the secular Republican ideal. She could be the secular virgin of Joan of Arc, the warrior martyr, and of Our Lady of Lourdes, the miracle worker. She could be the idealized embodiment of freedom, without the Republican weight of Machian leading citizens to liberty. I mean, that's not a bad idea, right? If any of you want to get in on my Sequana project, I accept your offers. You know, we can do like little, what is it called? When you crowdfunding. Yeah, crowdfunding, right. We can start it right tonight. And actually, there was an 18th century writer, for those of you, because we're in like a scholarly kind of environment, Jacques-Henri Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, who made Sequana the handmaiden of Demeter, who was trying to get her daughter Persephone, you know, out of Hades. And then eventually she gave up, and Sequana said to Demeter, I want to be paid for being your nymph and helping you. So she got all of these lands around anywhere she could walk, she got the lands. But then she got into trouble because one day Neptune comes rushing out of the sea to grab her and take her into the sea with him. It's kind of like Gallo-Roman Me Too. And what did she do? This is Bernardin de Saint-Pierre. When Neptune reached out his arms to seize her, her body melted into water. Her veil and green garments, which the winds blew before her, became emerald-colored waves. She was transformed into a river of that color, which still delights in wandering the places she loved as a nymph. Not bad, huh? So the first Gallo-Roman feminist healing goddess, there she is. And there's her face. She's got a nice face, doesn't she? Okay, now the Seine grows. This is the Seine becoming the mighty river. This is near Châtillon. You can see that it's still pretty puny because it has not absorbed all the other tributaries as it moves towards Paris. This is Champagne on the Seine. You know, you think about Champagne on the Seine, you might think about a crystal flute on one of those boats. This domain is actually sits on the Seine River, and it's part of the southern part of Champagne. It's not those fancy, did any of you go to those fancy domains like Glace and Épernay and Veuve Clicquot and this is the poor man Champagne in the south, in the Aube. And the difference is that you can just go and knock on people's doors and they'll say, hey, come on in, we'll open a bottle of champagne. You don't have to make reservations like 3 months early. This is one of the guys you might meet, it's Monsieur Fleury. And he actually has a domain that borders the Seine, and it was there that I swam in the Seine. So don't let anybody tell you that the Seine is not clean enough to swim in, and I live to tell the story. Here's the Seine as it gets bigger, as it moves to Paris, and I just love this photograph because it starts to show how the Seine is what they would call mineralized on one side and bordered in concrete, but that the left side still kind of has the feel of an 18th century painting. And this, does anyone know what this is?
Shield of Paris.
The Shield of Paris. Fluctuat nec mergitur. Does anybody know what that means? Yes?
Tossed by the waves, but will not sink.
Tossed by the waves, but does not sink. You get the first prize of the evening. Which is an illustrated map of the Seine in Paris. Congratulations. Oh, now, don't let me. stools, park benches. If any of you read the story that I did on the bridges, there's one on the side of the Pont d'Austerlitz. It's at a couple of metro stations. So it really is all over Paris. And I'm going to do like a little striptease now, because my last book, I don't know if you know that, but the Rue des Martyrs, that's where the first striptease was invented. Because it's even on my Hermes scarf. Okay? And I will take you. I can tell you where you can buy it really cheap. Okay, this is serious. Now we're be serious. This is the Brigade Fluviale, the police force of Paris. They ride around in boats. They actually have to do exercises every single morning. They have to swim. They have to do deep diving, because they will do rescue missions if a boat is in trouble or trapped, or if someone is fallen into some drunken kid has fallen into the water, or even if someone is attempting suicide. And I went out with them one morning. They took me out on this boat, and it goes like it seems like about 50 miles an hour. Do any of you remember Miami Vice? You know, not the movie, but the TV show. They're obsessed with Miami Vice. It's kind of like, they all think they're Don Johnson wearing the linen jacket and the backless shoes and the collarless shirt. Anyway, I played Miami Vice for one day with them. But you'll have new respect for these guys the next time you see them. These are the Lovelocks. You don't see very many of them anymore because Paris has banned them. One of these panels fell into the water, and I think the city of Paris must have thought that some Americans on a tourist boat might sue them, so they banned them and put up new barriers. Now, there's a lot of fun things you can do in Paris on the Seine, so I'm just going to read you another little blurb. Life is lived on the river, on barges, pleasure craft, pontoon platforms, decommissioned naval vessels. Afloat on the Seine, you can live, eat and drink, make love, get married, practice yoga, run a business, shop for books, watch fireworks, do a wine tasting, go fishing, dance the tango. You can attend a fashion show, a concert, a play. You can find a hotel, a psychiatric hospital ward, a film studio, a homeless shelter, an architect's showroom, all floating on the river. Just to put you in the mood, because by the end of this night, I want everybody to feel like you want to just get on a plane to Paris. You can buy books. Here's my favorite bouquiniste, Jackie Pellois. Tell him I sent you. You can pretend you're at a beach on the Seine. You can dance the tango. This is the salsa, actually, and Serge will give free salsa lessons in the summer if you arrive a little bit before 7 o'clock. And just tell him I came. Go fishing. Who fishes here? Oh God, this is New York. Nobody fishes. If any of you want to take up fishing, you can get a day pass and fish on the Seine. Or you can go boating with these crazed people who think they're living 100 years ago, because they have restored and they exhibit 100-year-old boats. And you will see restored versions of Maupassant and Caillebott's boats in this little area just west of Paris at Chatou. Someone is diving from the Alexandre Trois Bridge from a 12-meter diving board into the Seine. This was when Anne Hidalgo, the mayor, decided she wanted to campaign to get the Summer Olympics in 2024 in Paris. So she took all the Olympic divers and she said, you're going to go up this diving board and dive into the Seine. And I interviewed this guy when he went into the water. I said, what was it like? And he said, well, it was kind of black down there, but I think with a good shower, I probably will be okay. And then there is seduction on the Seine. You know, I wrote a book called La Seduction, and if any of you have ever read it, you'll see that Gérard is the star of the chapter on diplomacy, because I portrayed him as the most seductive diplomat in the world.
It was 20 years ago.
Well, it wasn't 20 years ago, it was just 10 years ago. 10 years ago. You've gotten better with age, like a fine wine, Gérard. This is La La Land. Did any of you see the movie? I mean, they're like dancing in California, and then suddenly they're on the side of the Seine, because you have to eventually go to the Seine if you're in love. But this is seduction. So someone said to me, Elaine, you've got to have a chapter about sex on the Seine. And I said, well, you don't really have sex on the Seine, because it would have to be under the bridges, and it could be pretty dirty, and I just read a report about the fact that there are 2 million people in Paris and 4 million rats, so it's not about sex. However, I am going to tell you a story about sex on the Seine. Every year the city of Paris sponsors this night of a cultural night where there's all these cultural events the whole night long. So one night they invited this Chinese fireworks artist to come and do a presentation, and he did something called one night stand. Oops, thank you. One night stand. And one night stand was the ultimate sex fantasy about having a one night stand on the river. So I'm going to read a passage about one night stand. One night stand opened at midnight with the sounds, and this is only in Paris, it's only in Paris. One night stand opened at midnight with the sounds of sex, heavy breathing, gasping, and moaning, woven into a contemporary musical composition and broadcast across the river by loudspeaker. Rhythmic drumming and what sounded like a monkey's mating call added auditory texture. Next, a pyrotechnic display sent fireworks into the air. The air lasted 12 minutes, estimated to be the length of time that the average French couple needs to climax.
At what age?
You always ask me the impossible questions. I'm the journalist. I ask the questions, Gérard. You ask, your turn is coming. Then the artist transformed a bateau mouche into a love boat where 50 couples from around the world had sex inside translucent red tents. The couples were given the option of either turning off the lights in their tents to copulate privately or turning them on to reveal their silhouettes in motion. To share the bliss with the crowd, the lovers could press a button signaling operators in small boats nearby to send a 15-second spurt of bright white fireworks into the air.
So it's real? It's a real story?
Of course it's real.
I thought it was your perversion.
I'm a reporter. I don't make things up. I'm not fake news. Okay, now we're going to get serious. We got to get serious. We're having too much fun. Okay, this is what the Seine looked like in 1910 when there was the great 1910 flood, where the waters went all the way to Saint-Lazare. This is what it looked like in 2016. And if those, if you don't believe in climate change, well, there it is. Now we're going to have a little contest. Who can tell me who painted this painting? All right, I'll make it easy. Who can tell me what bridge this is? Who got Pont Neuf? Somebody said it first. Did you say it simultaneously? Okay, we have to give them both a prize. Okay, where's Arthur? Okay, all right, you're gonna have to come up here and get your prize. Oh, here. Yeah, okay. Okay, it's Albert Marquet. That's La Saint-Martin in the back. Okay, we have one more. This one's easier about the artist, but you have to get the name of the painting. You ready? You got it. Oh, and finally, okay, who knows who painted this? Who said Matisse? Matisse, you got it. Okay, there we go. Okay, now we're going to move west. Oh, and this is the illustration that I've just handed out. It's an American artist who lives in Paris, and she does all of the streets of Paris. She did an image for my last book as well. And because my father had a little Italian food store in Niagara Falls, and he always believed the customer was always right, and le client est roi, and you had to give something, when you sold the quarter pound of salami, you had to give something else. Anyone who buys the book gets this, because my feeling is about places like the Albertine, is we have to give something extra to get people in here and to buy books from a bookstore. So this is my little contribution to the Albertine. Okay, now we're moving out of Paris. This is the Statue of Liberty that's on the west of Paris, and that's where I want to put, maybe I'll knock her down and put Sequana up. We're in Rouen now, and this is where Joan of Arc was burned at the stake, and her ashes were thrown from a bridge into the Seine because the powers that be didn't want to leave any trace behind, so to avoid a cult of personality. Here's Côte de Bec on Côte. Anybody ever been there? Did anybody ever take one of those cruises on the Seine? If you do, you'll go to this town. This used to be a tidal bore that was a tourist attraction early in the 20th century. It no longer exists, but the city is still famous for it, and they have a wonderful museum that has films about it. And then this is Normandy. You don't usually think of Normandy and the Seine, or this part of Calm Normandy. This is a 13th century windmill that had been built by the monks at Jumièges, and I went and visited on my own, and it was like surrounded by hundreds of birds, and I was a little leery of going in, and the caretaker, I said to the caretaker, "Did you ever see the movie The Birds?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Les Oiseaux?" And he said, "Nah." I said, "Hitchcock?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "If you don't come down in 15 minutes, I'll come and get you." Here's the Pont de Normandie that is built between Le Havre and Honfleur. It's still two completely different worlds. Anybody ever been to Le Havre? Did you go for the river or the sea? You went on an ocean liner, or did anybody actually go to visit the city? It's an absolutely wonderful city, I have to tell you. And Paris architecture, which we all laughed at, is now very fashionable, mid-century architecture. So I urge all of you great Francophiles to go visit. All right, we're back in Paris now. This is one of my favorite photographs. It's by an American who, in retirement, decided to he was a businessman, and he decided to do a book on all of the bridges of Paris at night, Gary Zucker. And I just think it's a wonderful feel that we have for Notre Dame, because I want to end my talk before I turn the floor over to Gérard, just by telling you a story about Notre Dame. I was in New York when Notre Dame was ablaze on April 15th, and I had already written the book. The book was already in print, and I realized that there was a connection with the Seine, because the infrastructure on the Ile de la Cité was insufficient, both in terms of the volume of water and the water pressure to put out the fire. So the fire force, which is part of the French military, called a boat from across the river to come and help. And they got it across the river, and it was too weak to do anything. So they had to call a second boat all the way from the Marne River that had to come through a big loop, curve, go through a lock. Can you imagine this commander sitting? Anybody of you ever been on a lock? How long it takes to get the gosh darn boat through the lock? And finally gets there. It was called the Ile de France. And the firefighters hooked up 4 tuyau hoses and immediately started pumping water into Notre Dame. And I'm just going to read you what ended up being the end of the book. The powerful motors of the Ile de France furiously pumped water from the depths of the river. By the time the fire was extinguished hours later, the city's firefighting force estimated that half the water used in the operation had come from the Seine. General Jean-Claude Gallet, the commander of the firefighters, said, "We had before us 2 elements of nature, fire and water. The fire had the face of a demon with a mind of its own. Then right in front of us, we had the Seine. I grew up Catholic, and I would never dare to contradict those who believe that God answered their prayers in saving Notre Dame. But I also have come to believe in the spiritual as well as the physical power of the Seine. Even before the ancient Romans conquered Gaul, its source had been the site of a temple of healing and a place of pilgrimage dedicated to Sequana. Notre Dame will be rebuilt, different perhaps, but with its primal place in French life and its symbolic meaning for the world intact. It will be reborn as a vibrant place of music, ritual, and prayer for believers, and a beautiful museum for the masses. The holy waters of the river that once bore the name Sequana saved the greatest cathedral in the world. I want to believe the spirit of the goddess herself lives on. Thank you. To the man who's probably my very best French friend in the whole world. We've been working together, arguing together, eating together for 30 years. And it doesn't get any better than having a friend like Gérard Araud.
Thank you very much. Now I know what is my role. I'm a supporting role to Elaine Sciolino. Really, and Elaine, before we start, because I think you are a bit arrogant about the Seine and France, can you tell us why La Samaritaine? From where the name La Samaritaine is coming?
Well, from the biblical story of Samara.
And why?
Well, you can fill in the blanks, can't you? The lady of Samara bringing the water, and
It's nearly that. Actually, in the Middle Age and the 17th century, there was a machinery, a pump, which was pumping at the place the water, so that the people could have the water from the Seine, and it came La Samaritaine, coming from the Gospels. You're pretty right. Actually, we have known each other for I think 30 years. We met in the kindergarten, and I want to emphasize that Elaine, before turning a Francophile, was also a journalist who wrote two brilliant books, one on, less funny maybe than this one. The first one was on Saddam Hussein, which is difficult to make a funny story about. And the second one that I recommend, because it's still a very relevant one, about Iran. And actually, Elaine is very good, really has very good knowledge of Iran and modern Iran. And she didn't tell you, but actually she settled down in Paris because actually she is forbidden to come back to Tehran. Really, and actually she can't. She's, the mullahs are really forbidding her to come back to Tehran. So in France, she has written 3 books. What I call a French trilogy, and maybe there will be a tetralogy, a 4th book, where she has tried to look at the French in a sense from a sort of different angles. Really, she's not writing a book saying the French are that, and that, but she has trying to go through angles, through the seduction, really. I think she wouldn't read the book, she wouldn't write the book now with the Me Too story the same way. But it's a funny book. The second one about the street Rue des Martyrs, where she's living close to the Rue des Martyrs, and now La Seine. I've had a role in her life, really, especially when she was the head of the New York Times bureau in Paris, because I was an official expert on her Upper West Side stories. What is an Upper West Side story, Elaine?
The truffle crisis in the Périgord.
Yeah. Because she said, really, basically one day she called me, she said, I have a problem because my editor, the New York Times, told her I need an Upper West Side story, which means I need a story for my Upper West Side readers. Some of you may be Upper West Side readers, we are Upper East Side readers, it's quite different. So my idea, I said Upper West Side story. Oh, the Truffles Market in Provence, typically Upper West Side, really? And the crisis of the foie gras, really? What a crisis of success. But she found other stories by herself. And she decided one day, and I was quite, really, it's really a great story. She went to the wholesale market in the suburb of Paris called Rungis. You go there at 4 in the morning, and you may know that we the French, we are the only one to eat some parts of animals that the British usually called the belly. whatever is it part of really of animals, the belly, and we are the only one to eat it. You know, really, when I try to introduce some Americans to the subtlety of andouillette, it was a total failure, total disaster. So, try to imagine that, you know, our American journalist, not only at 5 in the morning, but she had to taste this product at 5 in the morning.
Yes, but my Sicilian grandfather used to cook even worse parts than the French ever cooked in our basement kitchen.
So there was a cultural affinity, exactly. So going back to the Seine, actually I was struck by the idea of writing a book about the Seine, and I related it immediately to Notre Dame. You know, because frankly, Notre Dame, I didn't think so much of Notre Dame when living in Paris. Notre Dame was there. And suddenly one morning, you know, it was 1 p.m. in the US, I was in Washington DC, somebody came and told me something is happening in Paris. I opened the TV and suddenly Notre Dame was ablaze. And suddenly, I swear, I was not expecting it. Suddenly I was sobbing in front of the TV. Something really for me was totally beyond any belief, and I understood how much Notre Dame was part of my life, and even if I didn't think of it. And so referring to Notre Dame, I found suddenly that the Seine also is part of Paris, that you couldn't think of Paris without the Seine, and with this particular relationship with the Seine. And I was thinking also of Rome. I asked Elaine just before the meeting, I said, what is the difference with Rome? You know, she's Sicilian, so I thought she's especially from Italy, everything Italian, you know, really. So what is your impression?
Well, you know, I lived in Rome, and the difference is that you can move around in Rome and never see the river. You can never see the Tiber, where you cannot escape the Seine in Paris.
Yeah, because you know, in Rome they have this high ridge, you know, against the flood, because it's a very violent stream, and it's true that, you know, really, and in the Thames.
Oh, it's a boring river. It doesn't have a soul.
So during your writing the book, I think there is also in your book, you know, a lot of personal stories. Can you tell us, you know, really the unusual or unexpected meetings that you had? You were speaking about the bouquiniste, for instance.
Oh, well, the bouquiniste, the one whose picture I showed, is a guy named Jackie Gallois, and it's Jackie, Jacky. So I said, how did you get the name Jackie? And he said, well, my mother was pregnant in 1940 when the Germans were just about ready to come into France, and my father was called up as a soldier, and he said to my mother, name our son, if it's a son, and it will be a son, Jackie, because the Americans are going to come and rescue us, and he'll be saved. So, of course, the Americans didn't come for a long time, but he was left with the name Jackie. I mean, it was characters like this bouquiniste that made me really love the river much more, because as a journalist, you don't want to just write about architecture or bridges or cities or pollution. You really want to talk to people. And so I also got to know some of the bateliers, the barge people, and it took a lot of time to get them to trust me, because it really is a world unto itself. And this is where my background, both my Sicilian background and both my background in Iran, helped me, because they were very, very closed societies, and you have to learn how to work from the outer circle and then work in. So if I treated the batelier like a little Sicily, I could get inside. But that really, to me, made the river come alive, because it was telling the stories of the people who live and work and enjoy the river.
As you know, the mayor wanted that people could one day swim in the Seine. Do you think that one day it would be possible?
I swam in the Seine.
Yeah, but you
I actually have a picture of me swimming in the Seine, I want you to know. I didn't put it up
But
today.
I'm talking of the
because I
Seine
didn't
in
think
Paris.
I don't have a body like Ségolène Royal when she posed in the bikini with her 4 kids at age 53, when she was running for president. But so I'm a little modest, even though, yeah, I'm not as a French. Even though I did a little striptease. I think that the Seine is becoming much cleaner, and it's quite remarkable because, for example, the fish, in 1990 there were about 4 species of fish, and now there's over 30, including Atlantic salmon. And truly, the Brigade Fluviale, the police force, they go out every single morning and they swim in the Seine, and no one has died from a disease.
Obviously, you have been quite impressed by the policeman. Because you are going back and back to this part of your mission.
No, but it's really interesting because you see them in those little inflatable boats, and when you get to know them, you really see that they have this extraordinary mission because they're police officers first, and then they're divers and swimmers next. And I was out with them one morning when a priest was killed while he was saying mass near Rouen, and nobody knew if it was a terrorist attack or if it was a crazed, just a crazed murderer. But the police officers on this boat suddenly got an alert saying, "You've got to be on guard." And I remember one of the women, police officers, literally stripped out of her wetsuit and put on her uniform and strapped on her gun because she said, "We're police officers first." And that, you have to really respect these people because they have an extraordinary mission.
And what is the most extraordinary discovery that you made during your writing this book? What was the most surprising for you?
Frankly, the most surprising was to find the Gallo-Roman temple at the source of the Seine. A holy, healing temple where for years and years pilgrims came to be cured. And I never knew about it. I mean, I've lived in Paris for 17 years and I never even knew the name Sequana. And to me, that's the joy of being a journalist, is discovering secrets that nobody else knows.
And what do you feel is the relationship of the Parisians with the river?
I think it's a little bit like you in Notre Dame. You kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
You don't think of the river as the river. You just say, well, I'm going to cross over to the other side. But this is what the mayor is trying to change. She's trying to get people to embrace the river, and this is why she's closed off a lot of the highways and opened up bike paths and running paths and lots of little nightclubs. And some people hate this kind of boboization, gentrification of the Seine. But on some level, it's quite wonderful.
And what is striking also is that something that we take as granted, since you are the world specialist of bridges, on Paris bridges, actually most of the bridges are quite recent. Because during the 17th or the 18th century, actually there was very, very few bridges over the Seine.
Yes, and they would easily, the old ones would get washed away. I mean, there have been bridges on the Seine since the Romans.
The Romans,
yeah.
but they could be very often when there was the flooding, and there is something that I advise you to look at, is because Elaine showed only one picture of it, are the pictures of the flooding of 1910. It's totally, if you have seen the pictures, it's totally amazing. You see really people in boat in the Rue de Bourgogne, or really in the streets of Paris. And that's, as you know, is that what we are afraid of is what we call a centennial flood. Really, one day, the river will be again really over in Paris. And try to imagine in a modern city, try to imagine, for instance, the subways, really, and that's the reason, for instance, that the Louvre has moved all the reserve, all their paintings, where in the cellars they have been taken off and sent in the north of Paris, because we are waiting for the centennial flood. In 2015, everybody was thinking, that's it, it's coming, and when it happens, it will be devastating, really. In terms for a modern city. A lot of things have been made. Usually the Parisian will flood all the other cities before Paris will open, the locks will be open to flood the other cities, but really Paris will be also the victim.
I have a little surprise for you all.
Oh my God.
This is a really weird moment, coming to America from France with a happy book and seeing that everybody's just miserable, and you turn on the radio and it's either impeachment, 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 Syria and the Kurds, Turkey, global, climate crisis, the fires. It was the World Series. So there isn't that much interest in the Seine River. So that's why we're going to have fun tonight. So I have a surprise for you, because a very close friend of mine, Pascal Blondeau, is here tonight. Pascal is an artist, a photographer, a performer, a composer, a songwriter, and a friend. And a few months ago, he wrote a song for me about the Seine. And I asked him if he would possibly sing it tonight. And he said he would. And I just want to read to you what he said to me when I was talking to him today. He said, "I was raised by the Seine. My grandparents lived on the Quai de Voltaire. Every Sunday, I would fish under a weeping willow that still exists. And through your book, I saw myself as a child again. That's why I was inspired to stay up all night and compose this song." And what we've done is we've taken the words of the song and we've printed them out for you, and in French and in English. And if you can just be patient for us a minute, we're going to hand them all out, because I think that we need a little bit of song in our lives. And the Seine actually is a river of song. There was a French scholar who in 2004 did an analysis of the songs of the Seine in the 20th century, and he found 123 songs on the Seine. And I don't know, maybe some of you who know the kind of oldies. We have another singer here, yes. Doris Day, Dean Martin, the Kingston Trio, Bing Crosby, Eartha Kitt, they all sang about the Seine. So, with your permission, I'm going to ask Pascal Blondeau, one of the most gifted artists I know, to come up and sing for us.
I'm still asking to myself why I have accepted to do that. Because it's Elaine. I love you. There was a fabulous moment between Elaine and myself in our life. I met her the first time in my life in the place in Paris where my grandparents, in Saint-Jean-de-Pré, where my grandparents had a store. And I was there with the ambassador to explain to the ambassador my grandparents were there, and there is a new florist now. And suddenly Elaine appeared and got to us. You remember? And I met her the first time there, where I grew up, exactly where I grew up, just close to the Seine, every Sunday afternoon, when I was a small child. I was fishing with my grandfather, and under a tree. The tree is still here now, and it's in the song. That's why I wanted absolutely to give that gift to Elaine. It was important. It's very simple, without musician, it's just convivial. Elle peut pleurer la Seine, les larmes de son cours. Y a pas plus belle mise en scène pour nos histoires d'amour. Elle peut couler sereine, noyer tous mes chagrins qui soudain me reviennent. Un peu comme un refrain, elle peut crier « Je t'aime » dans un dernier sanglot, jusqu'à en perdre haleine, emporté par les flots. Je revois Serge et Jen rentrant au petit petits jours où sous la lune pleine étreindre leurs amours. Elle peut pleurer la Seine, les larmes de son cours. Y a pas plus belle mise en scène pour nos histoires d'amour. Elle peut couler sereine, noyer tous mes chagrins qui soudain me reviennent, un peu comme un refrain. Les mots d'adieu écrits par Alain a promis. Le pont des arts meurtris s'en souvient aujourd'hui. Près d'un saule endormi, je me revois petit. Ces histoires de Paris, pour toi, l'histoire de ma vie. Elle peut pleurer la Seine, les larmes de son cours. Y a pas plus belle mise en scène pour nos histoires d'amour. Elle peut couler sereine, noyer tous mes chagrins qui soudain me reviennent. Pour toi, ce doux refrain, la 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 la, la la la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. Hélène, je t'aime.
Doesn't everybody need a friend like Pascal in their life? Give him a hand. Come on. It's a nice day. It's a nice night. Thank you, Pascal. It was a song of love, a song of love of the Seine, a song of love of our friendship. Now we're turning the floor over to you, and if you have any questions or comments for me or the ambassador or Pascal, please, we'd love to hear from you. Yes. Do I still live in Paris? The question is, do I still live in Paris? Yes, I've been living in Paris since 2002. I live there with my husband, who is my hero. He had to come to Paris, pass the French bar after 3 years, learn the Napoleonic Code. So, the book is dedicated to him.
I just wanted to thank you for bringing this happy night to us tonight, because it was a pleasure to laugh so much. It hasn't happened in a long time, wouldn't be the times.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much.
What's the status on the statue?
I asked the director of the Reinvent the Seine initiative in Paris why I had lost, and he said, Madame Sciolino, you didn't have a financial plan and you had no money for the project. And I said, Monsieur Misiga, you don't understand. When it comes to Americans, money is never a problem. So anybody who wants to get in on the ground floor, just see me later, and I will take your crowd. Venmo, I just learned how to do Venmo. I'll take your Venmo. Yes?
Update us on the status of Notre Dame now.
Update you on the status of Notre Dame now.
The repairs.
I'm going to turn it over to the ambassador, because this is a really complicated one.
Actually, it's first it's a miracle. You saw the way the structure resisted actually to the fire. The only place where the nave was was broken was the place where there was the spire. When the spire collapsed, it collapsed with the nave. But the rest of the building, the rest of the nave was preserved. The problem that we are facing now is that the heat, there was an incredible heat, and the heat was transferred through the structure. So the first things to do is to really look at whether the structure, even if it's still there, is still able to stand the roof. So it will be a very technical, very long examination of all the structure, because apparently it may happen that the heat is transferred through the building to the foundations, and the foundations could have been actually shattered or even dangerously undermined. So it will be a long process. Actually, it will take several years. After that, you have the French. We are going to offer you a very typical French melodrama. We have started because we have announced the melodrama coming, so you can take your subscription, which is how to rebuild the cathedral. My conclusion, it will be rebuilt exactly the way it was before, but before we reach this point, we will have a very French debate where people are going to really to enter into intellectual, into political, into social, into economic arguments to say, really, and to say that President Macron is a great president, but from time to time, I'm not sure that he's right, when he said we are going to rebuild it more beautiful than before. More beautiful than before. Half of the French fainted. And it can be more beautiful than before. So there will be really a big debate about modernization, no way. And so my bet is it will take years before we decide to rebuild the way it was, including the spire. As you know, the spire, which was so middle-aged, actually was built in the 19th century. Really, it was added in the 19th century, so it looks middle-aged. So some people say, oh, so it's 19th century, we are not going to rebuild it. Of course, we are going to rebuild it. Now, the real question, and we had it with the Cathedral of Reims. You know that our neighbors destroyed deliberately in 1914, is what we call the forest. Before, between the nave and the ceiling, there was an incredible structure framework in wood. Incredible, really from the Middle Age. It was called the forest, we called it. So, and that's what burned really so quickly. So the question is whether we are going to rebuild the forest or we are going to make a modern, that nobody will see because it's between the nave and the ceiling. And that would be a question, because if we want to make a forest, you have to raise a forest, actually. There are really, you need hundreds of oaks, really to do it. So that would be part of the debate. But I'm a bit surprised, because, when Macron said it will take 5 years, some people said, oh my God, no, it will be longer than that. So obviously it's a very, very, very long process, which is more complicated than you can imagine from looking at the structure it is right now.
Can I play journalist for a second? Because you and I we talked about it at one point, because after it happened, we were talking about Macron, and it was when he was having all of the problems with the gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, and I think you said to me that it was a mistake for him to say that Notre Dame would be built even better than before. Can you just tell us, I know we don't want to talk politics tonight, but I really am curious to know how this played into his popularity or his lack of popularity.
No, first, there is before answering your question, we have another problem that apparently a lot of lead was spread over, and apparently there has been a pollution in the environment of Notre Dame because of the fire. And so a school has been closed because the level of lead was beyond the standard. So there is other problems. Really you have the real problems. You have also the problem for the archbishop, for the church. That we don't have a cathedral anymore, which actually led also in a very French way to a real debate about the cathedral, because of tourism. The cathedral was not anymore a worshiping spot because the people were complaining that there were millions of tourists all the time. So there is also this question about the Catholics were saying, well, it's not a monument, it's a church. You know, really, so there was also a debate, what is Notre Dame? Because it's true that for most of the people it's a monument, while of course for the Catholics it's a church, it's a cathedral.
Well, you know, what a lot of Americans don't know, a lot of French don't know too, is that there are 100 churches in Paris. And you don't think about Paris as a city of churches the way you think about Rome as a city of churches, but there are incredible works of art in so many of these Paris churches, and not just the two Delacroix and Saint-Sulpice, but I once found a Tintoretto, Last Supper, in the Saint-François Xavier church in the 15th, this awful looking church from the outside, but inside there is an artistic treasure. And so I'm hoping that this is going to lead to a discovery of all of the other churches.
Answering to your question and being serious, I'm sorry about Notre Dame. You know, our societies, and what is striking for a French ambassador when I was in Washington, D.C., was that unfortunately madness was not limited to the US. And actually, we had more or less in Europe the same crisis in the same terms. And especially the same crisis about identity. You know, identity. And so in France, there is the crisis about identity, what does it mean to be French? And Notre Dame being a symbol of France, you know, the people, especially the people on the conservative side, are really saying, don't touch Notre Dame. Notre Dame is France, so don't touch Notre Dame. You know, really. And there is also a way for the far right, actually, to emphasize that France is a Christian country, which is, when you say for the far right, we are a Christian country, they don't care about Christianity. It's a way of saying to the Muslims, you are not French. That's the use of identity. You know, not to define an identity, but to define the people who don't belong to the identity. So that's also, unfortunately, Notre Dame has become, you know, really part of this political debate.
Does anyone else have a question?
Last one. First of all, I read The Seduction years ago and loved it, but I have to go back now and find Gérard in it.
Oh, you didn't know the story about Gérard?
Well,
yeah.
it was a while ago that I read it.
It's too bad I don't have the book with me, because the story was about, he was renegotiating the strategic terms for NATO with the Americans, and it was all about whether or not well, I'm going to let him tell this. We have to let him tell this story before you ask your question. Would you allow me? Okay.
Of course.
No, we were fighting, you know, really with the American. At NATO, it's one of the preferred activities is the squabbles between the French and the Americans. That makes this quite boring organization a bit less fun. And it was 3 in the morning, and we wanted the French to say that whatever NATO is doing, it will do it under the Charter of the United Nations, which sounds pretty reasonable, but the Americans didn't want it. And at some moment, you know, the Americans really at 3 in the morning said, but if we can't act under the UN Charter, what are you going to do? And I said, we act. He said, I don't understand, because you are saying under the UN Charter, and now you are saying you can act out of the UN Charter. And suddenly I made a big mistake, a big cultural mistake. I told him, I said, you know, it's like the marriage. When you marry, you say that you'll be faithful to your wife, and after that there is the real life, but you need the principle. And suddenly, you know, I saw in the eyes of the Americans a sort of blank. The Italian was laughing. Really, all the Latin part of NATO was laughing. In the north, no. It was
Yes, but the end of the story is that there was this huge cultural impasse, because Gérard was saying, well, you know, you stick to your, you know, you say you have these marriage vows, but then real life intrudes, and sometimes you can't stick to your marriage vows, so this is why we're going to say this, but we may do something else. but it was a big deal. But it finally got solved by
by President Clinton and President Chirac together. And they reached a solution which was a perfect solution because nobody could understand it.
And as Gérard said at the time, they knew a lot about marital infidelity. So ask your question. Sorry about
follow
that.
up on that. I actually will follow up on that. So I read a few years ago in Vanity Fair a piece on the wife of Alain Robbe-Grillet, the Nouvelle Roman writer, and his wife. This was after he had died, but was in her 80s, and apparently she was a dominatrix. This was in Vanity Fair. And she apparently had a group of women that would meet and do whatever dominatrixes do. I certainly don't know. Under a bridge of the Seine. Did you come across that story?
Why didn't I know you when I was doing my research? I could have had some more material for the sex chapter.
I actually wrote a review of your book and loved it.
Oh my gosh. Second edition, you know, the paperback. I got it. Thank you for the.
And there will be. Can you please give us your name so as the sex advisor of the book, you will be quoted as the sex, more precisely the SM sex advisor of the book.
Thank you for this wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.